really started planning in 2008 towards the downturn of the economy. Figured it was a good time to start a business. Nobody was starting up, everybody was closing down, so real estate prices were low, and my job was in jeopardy as well. So we decided to start filing paperwork with the federal government, working with the city council. That all started in 2009, early 2009, March timeframe. Number of months of submitting paperwork back and forth with the federal government. 2010 starting to roll around. In late November 2010, we got our approvals back, or excuse me, 2009, we got our approvals back from the feds, and our state approval was granted in January of 2010. So officially we started in 2009 with the feds, 2010 with the state of Utah. The first year we did nothing but recipe development. 2010 we did a bunch of festivals. Some people may have seen us back then doing experimental beers and some other things at the festivals to get a feel for what the market would bear. And we released our first product in May, which is our wheat beer, Jack Wagon Wheat, in May of 2011. So that was the first beer we released. Subsequent to that, we had the Pale Ale, the Porter, and then eventually IPAs came later on, as well as the Amber. Those beers were self-distributed at first in Park City, where we started. We started in a small facility up there, about 500 square feet. We're in about 17,000 square feet. So we've been bootstrapping along, and as we had money, we've invested. As we've been able to qualify for loans, taken some SBA loans to put in larger equipment, and we just keep plugging along, making new and different things.
Yeah, it's been great to watch, and I know my first experience with Shades was your Ready to Fly Amber Ale, and I know you produced that in conjunction with the U.S. women's ski jumping team to try and help them along in their quest to make the Olympics.
Correct. So that was actually my brother-in-law knew the director of the Ready to Fly film, the documentary on the women's ski jumpers up in Park City, and so he made an introduction, and we met, and I said, hey, why don't we make a beer for your debut of the movie? And it helped promote us, helped promote your movie. And he was like, oh, this is a great idea. So that's what happened. We made an amber ale. We called it Ready to Fly.
We're actually in the Shades laboratory on site here at the brewery, which is very cool. And Marcio Buffolo, who's been with Shades for 2.5 years now.
Yes.
We've been talking, and you are doing some really interesting stuff with a particular yeast strain right now. And I want you to, I know there's been some discussion on how it's pronounced. I will say it is spelled Kveik, and you pronounce it?
Well, this is the big debate. Some people from Norway say Kveik. The guys from Milk the Funk, which is a big Facebook group about sour beers, call Kveik, and some places Kveik. I go for Kveik as a standard, but sometimes I will say Kveik.
Okay.
Give me this license.
And so it's a Norwegian strain.
It's it was selected in Norway for a group of homebrew club over there. One of these guys is from Lithuania, and today on this Milk the Funk group, it's common share and send yeast all over the globe because so many yeasts come right now, new strains producing so different profiles. So people want to try, and it's an easy way to go back and forth. So one of my friends was in Estonia, and he was there and traveled to Slovenia and exchanged yeast with this guy, Lithuanian guy, brought to Utah, and it was interesting. He was really happy with the yeast producing all these tropical flavors, fermenting in a really high temperature without autolysis or sulfur, any other phenols or esters other than tropical fruits, even no temperature control. The only problem, he got the yeast infected with Pediococcus and Lactobacillus, and that is a bad thing when you're trying to do a clean brew, especially on commercial level. So he was afraid to use in his own house, even though he brews a lot of sour beers. He wanted to do a clean, And with the lab we have here, the structure we have, we are able to use some chemicals to kill the bacteria and keep all the yeast alive. And the unique thing about the yeast, I try the most logical technique, which is put this strain in a plate and isolate a single colony. I found out there is more than 3 or 4 different colonies color coming from the yeast they gave to me. So probably this strain, it's not a unique strain, it's not a single one. It's more than 3 or 4 different yeast strains, and that makes the unique blend. So using some chemicals, I was able to clean, kill the bacteria, and stay with pure yeast, more than one strain, of course. And that yeast, it's phenomenal. It's unique. It's only available in our hand because it's not commercial available. It's not a single one.
Right. So in my minimal research that I did on this, it sounds like the Kveik mainly refers to yeast that has been reused over generations and generations. And so, like you said, it's not just one; it's many that have
it's
come
many.
together.
It's exactly what the farmhouse strains are here in U.S. So every single place in the entire nation has your own farmhouse strain. So when you blend them, you can be surprised what you can develop. Same thing with the Kveiks. Our strains that was in Norway, nobody knew that happened and being used forever in different regions. Imagine it's a really cold country, so they can develop really different flavors in different temperatures because it's not used to be there.
The other unusual thing is that most times strains don't like to live together. So typically you've got a dominant yeast cell that will kill off the other non-dominant cells, or you'll have cells that go dormant, and then once the dominant cell goes dormant, then they'll take over and do something else. So this is a real unique strain where all these strains, all these different types of yeast kind of live and work in harmony with each other. And that's really what the interesting part about this is.
And the most important, I believe, in this yeast strain, it's a Saccharomyces. So it's a strain that are not able to digest maltose, so we don't have to be worried about the yeast being cross-contaminated with in other parts, because it's first easy to kill. It kill in the simple CIP process. Caustic or acid or PAA will kill this yeast, and also it's a kind of yeast that you can be safe in the bottling condition because it won't digest the residual sugar you want in your beer, won't re-ferment in the bottles because it's a Saccharomyces, it's not Brettanomyces or some not traditional yeast.
Oh, interesting.
Even though it's a farmhouse, it has no power to digest maltose, so it's safe to be used in a commercial brewery.
Oh, perfect. But not a lot of commercial brewers are using this, mainly because it's really difficult to get, and I imagine it's somewhat difficult to work with.
Especially what I'm seeing right now, I'm seeing few house labs growing some Kveiks commercially, but they don't have the same profile because they're trying to do unique, simple, pure culture. So what seems to be that this yeast doesn't just develop these characters when in conjunction with other strains together. A pure peach usually don't produce that much of esters and tropical fruit we have here.
Okay.
So this is why this is so unique to us.
And so the primary characteristic you would say is it brings this tropical.
It's not definition one single fruit. It's papaya, mango, tangerine, orange, guava. It's all mixed in essential that you cannot define which fruit it is because it's all together. And it's all tropical fruits without any addition of anything. And this was stress yeast. The Kveik one, it's under a 3.4 pH. It was a golden sour, kettle sour. So even with all the stress, it's still being super clear, clean in the taste, no sulfur, no autolysis profile, ferment out at 91 degrees, and producing all these tropical flavors. It's phenomenal yeast.
Wow. And so that Kveik 1 that you mentioned, I had an opportunity to try that this afternoon, and it's delicious. It's golden. It's got grape. You said some grape characteristics to it. I noticed a little bit of pear possibly, but tell me about this Kveik 1 that is available now, correct?
It'll be available next week.
Okay, next week, and it's already an award-winning beer?
Yep.
Yeah, so we brewed this, and we started out, as Marcio said, with a kettle sour. So basically we started with the lactobacillus yeast in the kettle. We dropped the pH, which gives off lactic acid, and that lactic acid then causes that pH to drop, so you get this tartness from it. Okay, and so once that reached the level that we wanted in terms of the pH level, I think it was about 3.3 pH.
3.3.
I think that's where we ended up. We turned on the kettle. We boiled that wort, which is the sugar water, at that point before we introduced the Saccharomyces yeast to it. We kill off that lactobacillus strain. We added some hops to it to kind of balance some of that sugar. Obviously, we didn't do a lot of hops, so it's not like an IPA. So just enough to be able to balance that sugar. Then we add it to the fermenter with the yeast that we're talking about, the Kveik we were talking about. We let that ferment up to about, I think it was about 89. About the 89 degrees or so is what we reached at the max temperature. Yeah, it was still pretty cool yet. Probably would have gone a little warmer over the summer. We just let it free rise in the tank, crashed that down, and then from there, we split it into 3 different tanks. So we took that base beer and created 3 beers out of it. One using a Nelson Sauvignon, which is Kveik 1 yeast strain, which gives off some kind of grapey type aromas. And that's the first one we did. The second one we did was we used sweet cherry. And we did a lot of cherry. It was about
3 pounds per gallon of cherries.
So it comes out in a bright red color. It doesn't have an overpowering taste of cherry. It's got just a hint of cherry on it. Mm-hmm. So it's very well balanced. Okay. If you didn't know and you tried it without knowing that it was cherry, you might not be able to even tell it was cherry in there. So it's just one of those beers that you don't want it to be overpowering. It's just a little bit there, and you know it's there, but you don't really know what it is, and that's how I like my beers, very intriguing like that. Sure. And then the last one we did, we call it Tropical Thunder, just as a kind of a nickname. Here we use pineapple, mango, and guava on it. And then we added lactose to it to give it some body and some thickness, and it almost came out to be kind of like a milkshake type beer. So again, cloudy, lots of that fruitiness to it. The yeast enhances those tropical flavors, doesn't replace it, but enhances. Mm-hmm. And yeah, the first one we submitted to judging at the North American Brewers Association Festival. That one won a bronze medal in that category for American Sour. So we hadn't even released it yet. I was hoping that we had the cherry and the bottles to send, but we didn't. We were about a week late because we would have submitted that one as well. But we ended up winning a bronze for it. We were really ecstatic because we had no idea that would even had a chance to win. And it turned out to be a wonderful beer.
Oh, fantastic. Yeah, like I said, I was able to taste it, and it is pretty remarkable. But going back to the yeast specifically, it sounds like just getting it to be able to put into beer is quite the process. Is this quite a bit more complex and complicated than your typical brew day?
Yeah, so I'm lucky to be part of these groups of people that are passionate for sour beer, scientific part of the beer, called Milk the Funk, and be part of this group. It's always revealing new yeast. And so every time I have opportunity to take my hands on this kind of yeast, bring down, drive us a lot of tests in the lab. So first you have to grow the yeast and clean, make sure the yeast is clean. So there's a lot of tests to make sure there's no other contaminants. That yeast itself has a good flocculency, so it's gonna be clear at the end. We test for how that yeast is gonna be strong and aggressive. So we have to know the attenuation, if it's over attenuating, mid attenuating yeast. So it's a small test that we know if the profile of the yeast we got. After that, we have to think about brew schedule and of course test batch. So we usually partner with some home brews with my equipment and other friends. We brew different beers with that strain and see how it goes. And after that, if it's exactly how we predict in the lab and how that recipe turned out, so then I think about the recipe on the commercial scale, which usually goes, you cannot just scale up. You have to think about cost and time in production and everything. So we have to put that recipe in our scheduled production, and then and then we have this good setup right now here in the lab. We are able to grow our own yeast. So this is a nice part about here. We don't have to rely on other yeast labs. So we don't have to send to them to grow up and send us back. We've increased the contamination possibilities. We have hoods, we have stir plates, aluminers, and everything that protect our yeast inside that, and grow inside of these aluminers. And then in a couple weeks, we have enough yeast to pitch 30 barrels.
Wow. Now, I'd like you to talk about that a little bit more. Maybe you can jump in too, Trent, because I imagine a setup like this isn't all that common, at least with breweries maybe in Utah or brewers of your size. What was behind the reasoning that you wanted to have a lab in-house?
Well, we actually, almost from day one, I wanted a lab just from a quality control perspective. It took us a while to get to that point, and me not having a scientific background, trying to figure it out. Fortunately, we had some help of some people that had worked in the lab before I found Marcio to come help us and really finish building it out. I had another gentleman come in and do some consulting work that was a chemist and got us some of the basics. He wasn't a biologist, but he was able to get us and knew his way around the lab enough to be able to start to recommend some things that we needed to do. The other nice thing is that some of the other breweries in town also helped us out from a perspective of allowing them to come and see their labs. The Brewers Co-op, for one. Red Rock Brewing Company also allowed us to talk to their lab folks and pick their brains as we were starting to develop this. This lab took probably, and we're still kind of working on it, it took a couple years to really put together. Probably 2.5 years or so I've been working on, just when I can find the equipment at the right cost and price, I pick things up. When we have the money to invest, again, it's one of those things, it's an ongoing process, and we continue to add. Fortunately for us, we do have some resources here in the state of Utah where we can pick up used equipment at a reasonable price. And so that's what we've done as things come available. Right now, with what we have in the lab, there's definitely a significant amount of investment, but more importantly, there's probably some of the most sophistication in this lab in the country, as well as we know how to use it. So it's a big thing. I mean, we have probably one of the most sophisticated labs in Utah of any of the brewers, especially for our size. I know nobody else rivals us in the state with what we have here. In terms of what we can do and the processes that we can put through, it's unparalleled. And that's one of the unique things about Shades of Pale.
Sure. And you made a good point there that you can have all the equipment in the world, but if you don't know how to use it, then it doesn't do a lot of good. You have a microbiology background, is that correct?
Yeah, okay. I am a biologist with my I did grad school in cell biology. I used to work with diabetes, obesity, all the stuff, and my passion for beer was higher than that. So Trent gave me the opportunity to come here and start learning about brewing. I was homebrew before, but also was something that I knew how to do it. It's the lab. I've been working in the lab for 10, 15 years. And then being able to help on this side at the same time, learning how to brew and commercial scale was like an exchange at that moment. And Trent was always like, if you find something good, let's take it, let's buy it. Being in the University of Utah, where all the people over there are amazing, and was able to give us some donation on equipment that is extremely expensive, other equipment that was able to trace down to the surplus and buy a really nice price, will help us to build this. And also knowledge in studying, learning how to do libraries, to make sure the quality of the products it's consistent here and outside. Code libraries to make sure the batch to batch should be exactly the same or extremely close. All the tests, and then upgrading to a whole molecular biology part where I'm very, very, very familiar with being working for a while, not dependent on other big labs to develop probes. I could develop my own probes, and that it's nice that I'm shared with other people and other breweries as well, because it's a community, and the craft beer community has to be united. The way we do, I develop some probes. It's a free, everyone can access a couple sites and get the sequence, but people doesn't know how to do it, and they end up paying big companies to develop the same thing, which it's a community. I learn with them. They teach me or better techniques to extract DNA. I have better probes, and it's an exchange all the time. There's a nice thing about the community in general.
Exactly. Yeah.
One of those things that we did invest in, which we're pretty proud of, is that we did invest in PCR testing, which allows us, when Marcio says microbiology or molecular biology, we're able to now take a sample out of the tank and extract that DNA of what biological elements are in that sample. And through the protocols that Marcio has developed and other people have worked with to be able to give us that, we've now been able to take that and look for specific contaminants within our products. And we can do that in a relatively quick process. So instead of plating something and sticking it into an incubator and waiting for 2 weeks for it to develop, and then analyzing the plate if there's any kind of positive signs, we can now do that in 5 or 6 hours.
Wow.
And so that makes a huge difference in terms of our throughput from a production perspective, as well as a cost perspective, because now we can get more out of the same piece of equipment, more production out of the same piece of equipment, and that now cuts down on the cost of investment in buying additional tanks and things like that. So, as a home brewer, you're probably not going to go to this level, but as a commercial brewer, we're always thinking about, how do we make the best product possible at the least amount of cost, the fastest possible way we can. Sure. Right? And so we're trying to balance all those factors. I mean, we can make beers that are just outstanding, blow your mind, but the problem is that the American population won't purchase them because they'd be $15, $20 a bottle for a 12-ounce bottle.
Right.
That's non-barrel aged, non-aged, something like that, because of the cost of the hops and raw materials and stuff that goes into it, and the biology and other things that it takes to go into it, manpower and all that other stuff. Yeah, it all adds cost. And so in order for us to be able to make a profit, which we have to be able to stay in business, it would be so costly that we can't do that. So there's a give and take on both sides in developing and using some of these strains of yeast that Marcio is talking about from that perspective.
Right. And I think it's very cool that you have kind of the I don't want to say luxury, but the opportunity to be able to be innovative and experiment with different things. And is that something that you, as a brewery, ultimately want to be known for, as being innovative or trying out new things like this?
Well, I think so. I mean, ultimately, when I first started, I didn't have the technical background in the lab to be able to do that. So I was going down the path of what can I do and how can I do it the best I can with the knowledge that I have, because I was a one-man show.
Right.
And so as we've gone down the path, I looked at it from how do I make the best beer possible and putting out the best combination of flavors possible with the best body that I can get out of that beer at those particular Utah alcohol levels. Right. And so that's kind of, I went down there and said, I'm going to make the best 4% beer that I can possibly make, the ones that I really enjoy and I think other people really enjoy drinking. As we've come kind of full circle with the laboratory there and learning, right, because it's been an 8-year learning process for me as well, learning about the ingredients and how to think about making a unique beer. Thinking about how the hops and the barley and the grains and the sugars and the yeast and all the interactions in water that all come together to make a great product. One of the unexplored areas, there's still some exploration going on the barley and the hop side with new hop strains coming out, but not as much as the yeast. The yeast has not really been explored hardly at all. And the yeast adds a tremendous amount of flavors and complexity to the beer. And with the laboratory and with working with Marcio, it's definitely got us excited to experiment more with certain yeast flavors and profiles and other things that we're finding and learning, because it is a naturally occurring thing, than the hops and the barley, in my opinion. So it's how do we take those really unique things and mix them with what we've already know about the barley and the hops and the water science, and now we're taking something that's biological and sometimes out of our control, and now creating something that's completely unique and different that nobody else really can replicate.
Yeah.
And so when you say innovation, I guess you could look at it from a standpoint of innovation or innovators, but ultimately the innovation, unfortunately, doesn't pay the bills, right?
Right.
It's the base beers that are repeatable and that, you know, the majority of people are going to go back time and time again to grab. It's this is the fun stuff, right? And this is the stuff that gets Marcio excited and gets the craft beer geeks, quote unquote, excited about, and myself as well. It's neat to develop something that nobody else has ever had before. But that, unfortunately, in our scale and the way we've approached the market, it doesn't. That's not what our direction is.
Sure.
We will continue to innovate and add things to it and do experimental stuff, but our core brand is what's going to pay the bills.
Exactly, and you've got a very good core brand. You know, I've obviously been familiar with your beers for several years and really enjoy them. Just to wrap up here, though, let's get specific about the Kveik and some of the details on that. So the number one, which is the one that will be available first.
First is the Mellowiner and the NABA 2018.
Okay.
Golden Sour.
What's the ABV on that one?
Its ABV is 6.3.
Okay.
It's a Golden Sour, kettle sour, using majority Pilsner malt in the base. Only 2 IBUs of Saaz hops, and dry hopped with a good amount of Nelson Sauvin hops.
Okay.
The 2 is the cherry. Going to be available probably 1 or 2 weeks after we release the number 1. It's 3 pounds per gallon of sweet cherries, fruit from Oregon fruits, re-fermented. So this is an important thing. We re-ferment all the fruits. We don't believe in just mixed fruits and beer. I think it's overpowering. It's unnecessary risk. So we ferment our fruits. About 2 weeks re-fermenting, so this is why it's 2 weeks apart every single beer. It's sweet and sometimes tart, sour, complex, nice color with a white head. It's phenomenal beer. And the third one is with mango, pineapple, guava, all 3 fruits together in about 3 pounds per gallon as well, and about 1 pound per gallon of lactose.
Wow.
So it's a lot of body, it's thick, it's like a milkshake, tropical milkshake. We call it tropical thunder, but it's like a tropical milkshake. Low in IBV, 6.3. Again, it's low in IBUs, only 2 IBUs, extremely drinkable. Summer's here, so this beer goes really fast.